centuries. But it is my privilege and my joy to tell people that this was not the case at the Peoria State Hospital.
Oh,
This
gee.
was a place of compassion and caring. This was a place where the patients were treated like family. It was built on a cottage system. There was a married couple in charge of each cottage. The cottages were decorated for every patient's birthdays and the holidays. They had a movie every Friday night, a dance every Saturday night, and Sunday afternoons in the summer after the church services, if the weather was nice, they would play a game of ball out in the yard.
Oh, wow.
Yes, this was a place where the superintendent, Dr. George Zeller, insisted on the windows being left open a couple of inches so that the patients could see that they were not trapped. None of the doors were locked. The only locked wards were 2 buildings on the entire hilltop. That was the violent ward for the men and the violent ward for the women. Every other building was unlocked. And Dr. Zeller said, this is the beginning of the 20th century. He said, these people don't lock their doors at home. If they've come to us for help, why would we lock them in?
That's interesting. That was a different approach back then.
Yes.
Big time different approach.
Yes, Dr. Zeller was absolutely revolutionary in his treatment of the mentally ill. Dr. Zeller was a very interesting guy. He was not trained as a psychiatrist. He was trained as a surgeon, like his father before him. He practiced surgery in Peoria before he was tapped to head the Peoria State Hospital. And he was extremely proud of the fact that he had had no psychiatric training, because what that meant was he was not hidebound by prevailing attitudes towards the mentally ill and their treatment.
I think
that meant that
I was going to say most psychiatrists back in that time were actually brainwashed by the system, and it's scary how they went about their approaches.
Yeah,
so, this is unique.
There were a few mental asylums in France and Germany that took a more forward-thinking approach to the care of their patients. And when George and Sophie Zeller got married, they honeymooned in Europe. And that's where Dr. Zeller kind of picked up some of these ideas of, hey, you know what? We don't have to keep our patients in straitjackets. We don't have to keep them in cages. This is a revolutionary way of treating the mentally ill, and I'm going to bring this back to America, and I'm going to run my asylum on these principles. Now, Dr. Zeller wasn't the first superintendent of an asylum to say, wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to put straitjackets on our patients? Wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to put bars on the windows? But he was the first superintendent to say, let's try it.
Yeah.
Let's try it and see what happens. And what happened was that the Peoria State Hospital became the premier institution for the care of the mentally ill, not only in the United States, but in the entire world.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Well, then how could it be so haunted then? That's what I'm trying to, I'm trying to sit back here and not slurp my coffee over my shirt when you're saying that, because I'm sitting there figuring, okay, if it's like a luxury hotel, don't take this wrong, compared to all the other places, okay, where they were locked in a room and right. Electrocuted and everything else that went on. How could it? Why and how could it have been haunted?
Well, look at it this way: if you have spent years of your life in an almshouse or a different state hospital or an asylum, and you've been treated like that, you've had the cold water treatment, you've had the shock treatments, you've had the beatings and the straitjackets, trying to beat the devil out of you or whatever, and you come to the Peoria State Hospital and you get your own clothes. you don't have to wear a hospital gown. If you get 3 meals a day of locally grown food, if you get a garden of your own to tend to, if you get chickens of your own, living creatures to care for and love, if you get treated like family, when you die, wouldn't you want to stay there too?
I don't know.
If that's the
I can
only
think of
home you've ever known.
but I can sure think of other places I'd rather be. But compared to having somebody drill a hole in your head or electrocuting you, I guess
Right.
I wouldn't want to leave. I mean, if you're treated like a human, I mean, some of these people that were insane, they were treated worse than you would treat an animal, on a leash.
Exactly so.
So,
and Dr. Zeller pointed that out to people. He said, look at the dog who is chained up. Look at the dog who's running around the yard and all happy and everything, and then look at the dog who's chained up. He's going to be at the end of that chain just snapping and growling and everything. And why should we treat human beings like we treat animals?
But how was he tolerated with his other people in the profession? I mean, he's doing everything opposite what they're doing, and he's
got a lot of flack.
I would imagine.
Oh yes. Going back for just one moment, we were discussing cemeteries just recently, and somebody on a cemetery tour, asked the historian of the hospital your exact question. If they were so, if this was such a wonderful place, why is it so incredibly haunted? And the historian started to talk about the good treatment they got there and being welcomed as family. And even before she started talking, you hear a young girl's voice on the recorder, because somebody was recording it. And the girl said, "They're just so nice here."
Wow, that would be scary right there. Yeah.
I think that's brilliant. But Dr. Zeller, the attitude that other superintendents had towards Dr. Zeller was kind of a grudging respect, I think. He went to, in early 1906, he went to Washington, D.C., to testify about his asylum in front of the House of Representatives. And the whole idea behind this gathering of superintendents talking to the House of Representatives was to give the House an idea of what went on in these asylums. So all these superintendents are getting up and giving their reports, and Dr. Zeller gets up, and he's in front of the head speaker of the House, and they start peppering him with questions. And they absolutely are floored by his answers. And they're like, "Well, don't you have violent patients in your asylum?" And Dr. Zeller goes, "Of course we have violent patients in the asylum. There are violent patients all over the place. We simply happen to treat them differently." He said there was one patient that would lunge at people and try to hurt them, and he bit a guy's nose off.
Oh, wow.
And the guy leading the questioning is like, well, what do you do about this? Don't you keep him in a straitjacket? And Dr. Zeller says, "I don't believe in any restraint. Restraint is bad. We do not use restraint at this asylum." And they were like, well, what do you do when somebody is that violent? And he said, "Well, we had considered having his teeth pulled, but we quickly realized that would not. I mean, that didn't seem a viable option in this case, because he bit one guy's nose. We shouldn't pull all of his teeth." And they're like, "Well, what are you going to do about this guy in the future?" And Dr. Zeller said, "Well, we're going to keep him away from people's faces."
Yeah, or other body parts.
And he pointed out that a lot of the damage that his patients did to themselves and to others actually happened before they got to the Peoria State Hospital. These were altercations between patients, patient-on-patient violence that happened in the almshouses well before they came to the Peoria State Hospital. There was another instance where a woman had come to the Peoria State Hospital. She was absolutely insane. She had tried to harm her children. She would rip her clothes off. She would chase her husband around with a butcher knife, all sorts of horrible things. She came to us. She came to the Peoria State Hospital, stayed with us for a while, and she got better. And she was able to be released and return to her family. And Dr. Zeller did kind of an exit interview, if you want to call it that. And he said, I really wanted to know, he wrote this down in his memoirs. He said, I really wanted to know what had brought about such a drastic change in this woman's behavior. Well, what had happened was every cottage had its own little garden, and it had its own chicken coop. Because Dr. Zeller felt that if the patients had living creatures to care for, that would help with their recovery.
Uh-huh.
And there's a thunderstorm, and the chickens were outside. So this woman scooped up the little baby chicks in her apron and carried them to safety before they all drowned or got hit by lightning or whatever, or, pounded into the dirt by the rain.
Uh-huh.
She saved these little baby chicks. And Dr. Zeller wrote, this woman who broke furniture, who tore her clothes up, who smashed crockery against the wall, was moved to compassion by the plight of these little baby chicks. And that made all the difference.
Yeah.
That broke through to her and helped her recover. It helped her heal.
Well, that's probably why, probably after that, a lot of the mental institutions, allow them to have little pets like little cats or kittens or, bring in dogs and stuff like that, because it soothes them, it makes them, brings out other feelings in the person. So he was probably one of the first people to actually realize that.
Yeah.
That's interesting. But, wow. Because before that, if you go back in the 1700s, 1600s, and 1800s,
oh, yes, people...
they if you were in a mental institution, you're not going to come out.
No,
not alive
it was very
anyway.
Unlikely.
No,
it was very unlikely to be released as cured from a mental institution in that time. And Benjamin Rush was one of the signers of the Constitution. Actually, founded a hospital back in that time, and it was a mental hospital, and people were allowed to wander through the hallways and basically poke the inmates with sticks.
Yeah.
And just allowed to point and make fun, and that doesn't help your mental state any. Honestly.
No, no more than going in a room and getting electrocuted either, I guess.
Right,
yeah.
right.
I guess you would maybe condition yourself, maybe. And that's probably what they were trying to do, is keep somebody, like you train a dog, basically. You got somebody...
That's not exactly accurate. There are some mental illnesses and organic brain difficulties that are actually helped by shock therapy.
Yeah, but
but
we were talking about shock treatment of today versus shock treatment back in the it was completely different from everything
Absolutely,
I read.
Yes.
So you would have a certain amount of patience that after they've been shocked enough times, and if they know that if they scream or do anything wrong, they know they're going to be suffering pain. So that's what they were trying to do, is probably keep them quiet, and that's how they were conditioned. You're right. There is some where mild shock treatment will help people,
right.
but this stuff back then, it wasn't mild. So I mean,
No. And that was the difference between the Peoria State Hospital and anywhere else. We also performed electroshock therapy, but other places